Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Constellation Season 1, Episode 7. It's called Through the Looking Glass, and I believe this is also the penultimate episode. I was convinced there was 10 of these things, but it seems like there's only 8, so this is actually the second last episode, and next week is indeed the finale. I mean, the main thing I need to talk about, actually, to kick off this review is basically retract half the things I said last episode. Not because I changed my mind on anything, but because last episode I spent so much time talking about why there had to be 3 universes. And in this episode, very, very early on, when Joe is talking to Alice and they're listening to the tape and they're hearing the talking in Swedish and they're getting a bit more out in the open like I wanted them to about, hey, this is not how you remember it, is it? It's like, she's like, no, we never spoke Swedish. I don't speak Swedish. I can understand it a little bit, but I don't speak it. In this scene, Joe straight up says that she didn't know what the Cal was until after the switcheroo. And someone in the comments actually mentioned this in the last video, to the point where I actually went back and checked episode 1, and the reason why I believe that our Joe that we've been watching did know what the Cal was. I was convinced she did. And even when I checked episode 1 before this episode, I still felt convinced, because the scene in episode 1 where she's talking to Alice on the iPad, and then she talks to Paul as he's working on the Cal, like she was speaking Swedish to her right before then, it was continuous, and I was convinced that she knew what the Cal was, that this was in the world. But obviously this episode clearly says that she did not. And to be fair, I do remember in episode 2, her reactions whenever she was asked to go get the Cal and bring it down with her on the shuttle, or on the pod. She did always have a bit of a reaction to that, but at the time, it read more like, why would I waste my time for your science experiment I know barely anything about? Rather than, I have no idea what that is because I've never heard of it. But obviously there was room for whatever there, right? So, after this episode, because of this episode definitively saying that our Joe that we've been following, mainly in the show, did not know what the Cal was, I went back again, and I watched that scene from episode 1, from the second that call starts on the tablet, when they're talking over Skype or whatever it is, to when she gets to Paul and he's working on the Cal. And there is a switch. It's very subtle. It is very, very, very subtle. But if you're paying very close attention, in the shots looking at where Paul is with the Cal's not actually there in the shots where they're speaking Swedish. And then when she does get to Paul, Alice's hair does slightly change. Like, she has like pigtails in one and then a ponytail in the other. But it's very subtle. And the reason why it doesn't play super obvious when you first watch it, and why it's very, very easy to miss, even on a second viewing when I went back to check it, I still missed this, is because she already switches to English to talk to other people on the station. When they go past one of the other astronauts, the woman, Joe says, hey, it's so-and-so, and Alice switches to English, obviously because the other astronaut only speaks English, right? Doesn't speak Swedish. So the version of Alice that does speak Swedish had already switched to English to talk to someone else on the station. So when they get to Paul, even though the switch has happened, it still plays like she's just switching to English because he won't understand her if she's not speaking English. So it's actually very sly, but there is a switch. It is there when you go back and look for it. Now, how do I feel about this? I genuinely don't know. Because on the one hand, it is there. It's undeniably there. I almost feel like that entire last episode, in a weird way, was kind of ruined for me because this wasn't something that was picked up already. I feel like if they'd confirmed, if we'd heard Joe, and there's probably other little moments that kind of hint at it, right? If you're looking for them now that I know. And some of them might even be painfully obvious, and I'll be annoyed at myself for not noticing it. But if they'd had the conversation where Joe had said, oh, I didn't know what the Cal was, before the last episode, at least it would have cleared that, and then that episode could have played out in a much simpler way. Because instead, I spent all the last episode being crazy, theorizing, talking about at least 3 timelines, because there's 3 different permutations of things that are happening here, 2 with Henry and 1 with Bud. But no, it actually seems more straightforward now. Now that it seems that this Joe did come from the universe with Bud, it does seem like a simple switcheroo. It's 1 and 2. Although, that said, having said that, there is some stuff in this episode that also kind of has 4 at one point, because there's 2 derelict versions of the cabin and then 2 regular versions of the cabin. And the regular versions have Joe and Magnus from different universes in them. And the 2 derelicts, one with a living cat and one with a dead cat, have either Alice with them. So it kind of felt like there was like almost like a heads and a tails to both universes or something between all these cabins that we were seeing. I honestly don't know how to even begin to talk about that, to be honest. So, I mean, to get into the rest of the episode and how I felt about it, I still feel kind of mixed on a lot of these things. I think I still stand by, and I've only become more convinced of this the more of these episodes that we've had, that all the glimpses we got of all this cabin stuff back in episode 1, 2, and 3, or however many, I do think was a mistake. I don't think we should have seen any of this stuff, because for the most part, all it's done to these episodes is make some of it annoying because we're rewatching certain parts. But it's actually made me more annoyed at those episodes having those scenes in retrospect, because the good parts where they're actively talking about this stuff, where Alice is actually saying, hey, I don't think I'm your Alice, and then her kind of agreeing with her later on and saying, yeah, you're right, I don't think I am your mom, I think there's another Alice, and I think you belong to someone else. Like, they were having those conversations in between some of those scenes that we saw, those bookend scenes that we got back in episodes 1, 2, and 3. But at the time, they were played without that context just to make it mysterious. But the characters themselves had far more context in those scenes. They'd already had some of these conversations. They knew way better than we did. And that's frustrating as a viewer, I think, because it's okay to feel confused in a scene if it sort of mirrors up with the characters. But now that we know that the characters, well, they don't completely understand everything, they still don't know how to make things right or anything like that, the fact that they were so much far ahead in the conversation than the episodes were letting us onto is kind of annoying in a disconnect kind of way. There's kind of a rift between them and the audience. And then it's not even as satisfying now that we get them, because half of it is stuff we've seen before. So it feels like it feels almost like there's padding here by showing a lot of the same stuff twice to me. And then on top of that, this episode is a lot of going to one cabin and going back to the cabin, going to the other cabin, coming back to the cabin. And we do this with multiple characters, 2 Alices, a Joe, 1 Magnus. The other Magnus is on his way there, but he doesn't quite get there till the end. And it made it for kind of just an awkward viewing. The other main critique I would have of a lot of this stuff, and this is something that goes back all the way to episode 1, is where I said, this feels like it's doing the mystery box, hard science fiction thing, but as we discover more and we learn more, the rules will become clear, and there should be a clear set defined amount of rules. I think one of my problems with this show and how it presents its stuff is that even though we're getting more of an understanding of certain things, and there's definitely motifs, like for example, the 2 Alices talk through a mirror in this episode. Well, not just the mirror, there's also the tape recorder, but they see each other in the mirror and the reflection, and that's been set up as a motif with the Bud and Henry. However, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of hard rules to these things, and it felt like the way the cabin was shifting between the derelict cabin and then the cabin that's on fire, back and forth, where you could see some of it in a reflection. And yes, they've set up the fact that reflections can kind of show what's in the other world. I mean, forget the fact that there's kind of 4 versions of the cabin at this point by the time we get there. It feels so just when the episode wants it to happen, when these switches are occurring, or how and when they're seeing each other, and why certain things are being triggered when they are. Maybe there's some theorizing you could do that maybe nails some of it down, but at this point in the show, I would like there to be more defined rules, if not explained, and certainly ones that you could figure out. To me, a lot of the excitement of these mystery type shows is when the pieces start clicking into place. And I feel like even though some of it should feel clicked into place right now, it kind of doesn't, because it's still treating a lot of the moments as supernatural, as is like spooky things that are happening just at the right time to create the right moment kind of thing, as opposed to I understand why A plus B is equaling C kind of, I like there's a very unsatisfying element to the way that it actually presents its universe hopping, because I love conceptually what it's doing. The idea that these two Alices get to talk to each other and just straight up get to say, hey, my mum died, and then the other one goes, no, actually, I think my mum died, and I've just got your mum now. And then the emotion of, oh, can I have her back? And then eventually, Joe being there and passing on messages and her saying, oh, I'm going to try to, I'm going, I don't know how, but I'm going to keep trying. Like, this is a scene that should be a big, big moment emotionally. And I should love it. But fundamentally, by this point, the idea that we now have 4 versions of the cabin and all of them have this tape recorder at the right place so that everyone can hear parts of these conversations, including the Magnus that's in the other universe. It just kind of feels like, wait, why are all these tape recorders here at the right time? That just feels kind of random. It feels like just this big plot convenience rather than, oh, those rules that have set up where one's left a tape recorder there, especially since we know that the tape recorder wasn't necessarily left. At least in all the universes there, if any of them. I don't. So that stuff's kind of annoying, and then the ending does more creepy kind of bollocks. So, I mean, the big thing here is that the cabin that main Joe is in with Alice is set on fire, and accidentally, the wind knocks the door shut and it knocks the lamp over. But at the end of the episode, when they switch back to the fire universe, Alice is grabbed by Joe. She takes her outside, but she's dying. She's struggling to breathe. Henry's there, and obviously there's a whole thing with Henry, which I'll get to in a bit. But Joe's giving Alice mouth to mouth, and she's trying to save her. And her real Alice, is like standing there saying, "Mama, it's me. I'm your Alice." And of course, it's clear what this scene is doing. It's presenting Joe with a choice of, well, she has to, she can't just let this Alice die. She has to save this other Alice, even though it's not hers. And that's fine. I get the drama of doing that. I get it makes her, in a vacuum, that is a good character quality, that she's a hero. She's not going to let this Alice die just so she can have hers back. Of course, there's no indication that she could just walk off with the other Alice and she'll just be in that universe now. But, dramatically and symbolically, I get the moment they're going for here. I just wish I cared more about the actual characters to really feel invested on this stuff. But that's a problem I've said I've had since early on in the show, is just never really quite feeling the human emotion side of this. Like, I've just never connected to the characters all that much. Which is a shame, because these moments would probably benefit greatly if I did. So Joe does help save Alice, and now she's left in this world where now she's going to be in trouble for kidnapping their daughter and almost getting her killed. Magnus is, accusing her of saying, "What have you done?" Almost the second that he realizes Alice is okay. Like, now this is her fault. She's to blame. And she kind of is, in a way, but obviously it's a lot more complicated than anyone's going to listen to. So the ending where Alice then wakes up in the hospital after this dream, because it seems to be that Alice who has this dream of the dead cosmonaut lady, right? Irina from the other universe, talking to her and saying, "Hey, do you want to see your mother? I can take you there. She's close," or something to that effect. She's nearby, or she's with me, or something. Alice wakes up and says, "Where's Mummy?" And he's like, "Oh, she's went away with Irina, who's going to look after her." And she's like, "Is she a cosmonaut?" And he's like, "Yeah, I guess she was." And she's like, we have to go find her." And that's the cliffhanger. Now, again, this is the so frustrating thing about this show, is that there's parts of the concepts that are really strong and really appeal to me. And the idea that the Alices are now aware of what's going on and probably believe it more than anyone else, and the idea that now this Alice is going to have to try and save Joe from a predicament now that we don't quite understand yet. But the idea is that, oh, it's bad that she's with Irina. The part of this I don't like is the spooky dead astronaut in her dream saying this stuff to her. Almost like the dead version of Irina is still kind of like... existing in the ether somewhere, in the same way that because Joe's alive, dead Joe's kind of coming through, because she's still like complaining about her eye and her vision going blurry and stuff from where the other Joe got injured. It's like somehow she's still tethered to the world in some way, the dead version of Irina. I think treating her like she's the real villain of the show though, and she's some boogeyman, that felt out of nowhere. Like when this dream sequence started, I just kind of leaned in and sort of been like, what are we doing now? What's this? Like it wasn't exciting to me. I was more just like, oh, this is a choice. Okay, this is something that's happening. It just felt like such a weird pivot that I don't think, like obviously I expected them to get back to the dead cosmonaut in some way or other with some idea, but I wasn't expecting, she's going to be like a boogeyman style character. At least that's how it's presented here. I don't know how far they're going with it, but maybe Irina is a villain. She is doing something bad. I don't know. Maybe she also swapped and she therefore knows the other version of her is dead and she's up to something. Because that sort of gets us into the Bud and Henry stuff, is that when Henry gets to the burning cabin, we start hearing the segments of what happened last episode with Bud. Like he's hearing flashes of it, of like, of Paul arriving and of him taking out the gun. And then what happens, and this is a exciting moment, although I do want there to be like a reason why it happened right this second, is Bud and Henry switch back. We go to the apartment and it's clearly Henry holding the gun and he's terrified that Paul's lying there dead or dying, and he calls the 911. He doesn't know his address because he's never been here before, so he's trying to figure that out, and we kind of leave that there. And then Bud's just sort of like freezing his ass out in the snow and doesn't know who the kid is. And it's like, okay, this is obviously exciting. It's exciting for what it means for Joe, because this is the thing, Joe doesn't have someone to switch back with. And neither does Paul, potentially, right? Because their alternate versions on either side have both died. So it begs the question, if somehow Joe is able to switch back, would it mean that she just dies? Or would it mean that she is now dead, but the version who has been dead will now be back in this body? Right? Would it be this almost like coming back from the afterlife kind of thing for the Joe that switched over and now might be back? It's an interesting question, and I don't know what they're going to do or play with it with. I'm not entirely sure. I do really like narratively though that it's, because one of the things I said last episode that I really like the idea of is that Joe and Alice, even though they're not the mother and daughter, understanding they're not each other's mother and daughter, but working together because now they have a common goal of fixing that, right? Of fixing that and getting her back to the real Alice. And now Alice has kind of befriended the other Alice, so that's another whole other element. But there's something kind of nice and again kind of heroic of the only hope now that Joe can be saved potentially is from Alice, but not her Alice, like the other Alice who she's now kind of started to bond with, putting her neck out for her and trying to like convince Magnus, hey, we need to go save her. And it would kind of repair for, Joe saving her and not going off with the other Alice when she maybe could have. But I like that narratively. From a character journey perspective, I love that switcheroo. And the idea of like the alternate versions bonding with each other and becoming like not mother and daughter, but like being this, weird new friendship that is different and, is not natural in any shape or form, but it's still heartwarming and it's still beautiful and it's still these characters sticking their necks out for each other. I mean, if this Alice can't save her real mum, but maybe she can save this one. And she's still worth saving probably, right? Just because it's not her Joe doesn't mean she shouldn't. And I like that from a narrative function. I just think the threat and the way it's introduced here in this last couple of minutes just feels like a weird, like suddenly Irina is like a terrible boogeyman of some kind, and maybe the ghost of the dead version is talking to her through a dream. Maybe this ghost is trying to come back. And the same way that I said that maybe if Joe somehow is switched back, if like the one that's been dead just sort of comes into the body after technically being in the afterlife or whatever the equivalent is it possible that the ghost Irina, who is in the dream and is in is the dead cosmonaut, has been trying to get back into her body that the Irina in this universe has been hanging around in for decades. She's trying to get back in, but like Irina's evil and won't let her or something. Because when Bud was talking about all this to Henry when he was making his threats, he said, "Hey, I'm going to f up your life, and there's nothing you can do. I'm coming." It kind of feels like the end result of that, even though it doesn't feel like he triggered it intentionally, was to just like switch back, was to take his body back. Is it possible the dead versions of these characters who have switched are trying to get back in their bodies? And this idea that Joe keeps feeling like something in her eye, and is, it's maybe that she is going to switch back and be dead, which effectively means that this 5 weeks of being back on Earth has been like almost like a gift to just kind of say goodbye in a way, and then the other one will take her body back and she'll keep moving from there. I don't know. I mean, some of these ideas are super interesting. I do think the execution leaves something to be desired. And as far as, obviously, I apologize that I was so adamant in my beliefs last episode. But when I went back and checked that episode 1 before this episode, I was still convinced of everything I said. And it wasn't until I checked it again after watching this episode, which I did right before recording this. I looked up that scene, I watched the 3 or 4 minutes, I spotted the switch over, and I'm like, fair enough, it's there. I can't argue with that. But I do question the order of which they made that clear to the audience. But hey, clearly some people noticed it, and that's great. Obviously, it was there to catch. But I do think some of how they present some of this universe switching still feels more spooky and supernatural than like than something with like hard defined rules. And again, I said this last time, I'll say it again. Maybe somehow by the end of the finale, none of it will feel like it's just spooky bollocks. But some of the stuff with the 4 cabins and all the tape recorders being there conveniently for them to start talking to each other and hear things, that all just felt like a little out of nowhere to me. And I don't know if that makes it that satisfying. So, hey ho. Yeah, I'm good. I think I'm good. I don't have anything else to add. We got the finale next week. We'll see how that is. Hopefully it's at least a fun ending, and hopefully I like all the concepts they at least throw at me. But it's been a real ups and downs kind of show for me that I've never quite fully connected to and been in love with. But it's definitely been interesting to discuss. And but that said, though, I am glad it's kind of wrapping up next week for now at least, and I don't have to worry about having insightful things to say. I guess because sometimes when I'm not in a good mood when I'm watching it and like it's doing the stuff that annoys me, I'm just kind of sitting there like groaning and just kind of being like, okay, all right. But hey, it's what it is. So, yeah. Thank you for joining me. You can go check out my reviews of Shogun, which I'm enjoying a bit more in this show, I will tell you that. There's some new stuff starting soon I'll be checking out as well. You can also check out all the classic shows that I review, such as X-Files and Person of Interest, Twilight Zone. Go and have a look-see. But that is me, so thank you for joining. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep the lights on. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?